Is your team not performing well? Is morale low and turnover high? Are you falling further behind the competition? I'm here to help. I'm Shani Magoski, and this is the Leadershifter Show, where business strategy and culture finally meet. Explore shifts of all kinds required to build cultures of trust, engagement, and execution excellence. I promise I am not your typical boring leadership consultant, and I will help you and your team get your shift together. All right, we are live. Hey, Leadershifters, happy Friday, and welcome to another episode of the Leadershifter Show with Shani. We've got a really cool guest and awesome topic today. We've got Bradley Hamner, who is a business growth coach specializing in service-based businesses, which I love because I'm in the service space myself as a consultant and coach. And the theme of the work he does is taking business owners from rainmakers to architects. Mm-hmm. And another way to say that is from working in your business to working on your business, which we've all heard before. But Bradley's going to offer you some really practical principles and questions to pose to yourself to really help you shift from one place to the next. So, Bradley, welcome from Alabama to the World Wide Web of podcasts.
I'm so excited to be with you today. Yeah, and I look forward to serving your audience and hopefully giving some things that they can take away and implement right away.
Excellent. Well, super happy to have you on the show today. And, I read some interesting statistics on your LinkedIn profile that I thought would be set a good table for us as we move ahead today. 96% of small businesses don't make it to their 10th birthday. And of those that do, 91% never cross $1 million in revenue.
Yes.
So is that why you picked your niche?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons. I mean, if you think about that, business is hard and it gets harder. I mean, if we were going to get on a plane and they said, well, there's a 4% chance that you're going to make it, then nobody would be getting on those planes. But
that's right.
I mean, business is really, really hard. And so those statistics are really scary. I grew up in a small business family. Entrepreneurship is just in my blood and I love it. And I just think that while small business can oftentimes be shared as the American dream, business is really, really hard. And I think the faster you want to go, the further you want to go, the harder it is to get there. And arguably, maybe I've even seen some recent statistics that possibly 96% of the businesses don't even cross $1 million. So not only is it that only 4% of the businesses actually make it to their 10th birthday, but maybe only 4% of them cross $1 million in top line revenue. Before you and I got started, we were laughing about Twitter and Elon Musk, and we hear these big numbers about $45 billion, et cetera. Yeah. But at the end of the day, what really grows, the economy is small businesses, and the vast majority of businesses can't cross that seven figure mark. And I think there's just a lot of reasons behind that. And so some of the things we'll be able to unpack today. And we just got finished a few weeks ago with a retreat with business owners around the country. And we call that retreat Beat the Odds for that reason.
I love that.
Yeah. We call it Beat the Odds Retreat because I think that everything that we're doing is not only about having freedom, which is talked a lot about in entrepreneurial circles,
sure,
but it's really about beating the odds. And I think that embracing the fact that business is really hard, instead of the mindset of like, oh, it's got to be easy and other people make it out to be easy, I think it allows us to be able to say like, yeah, this crap is hard. And you know what? If it is hard, then how do I surround myself with the right mindset, the right skill set, and the right tool set, the things that you're obviously giving to your community to be able to beat those odds.
Excellent. And I don't really want to go down this rabbit hole per se. I just want to acknowledge that there's probably even more of these statistics happening during and in the aftermath of COVID when, and so I'm wondering what sort of tragic stories that maybe you were even able to help some businesses turn around. We don't have to go into it, but I'm guessing
that you've got some success stories to share, applying your principles to some real heartbreaking situations out there during the
Oh
pandemic.
man. Yeah. It was really interesting. I think that for a lot of people, we kind of seen this, the gap got a lot bigger. Some companies, some of the people that I've worked with had an amazing run the last couple of years. I'm talking about record top line revenue growth, record profits. And then for others, man, the tide went out and we got to see who all was swimming naked.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, that's actually a Warren Buffett quote or a Bill Gates quote. One of the, I think it was Warren Buffett, but really, I think that we were tested, and some of the people were able to survive, but it was because of the government intervention. And then other ones did have some really tragic things. I think there are definitely principles that we can share about, well, what did we learn? Okay. What did we learn throughout all of that? And not to get anything political. I'm just talking about running our businesses. What did we learn? I'll just give you one. We've talked to our business owners. You got to sit on more dry powder, meaning specifically more cash.
Yeah.
I think that the cash cycles that people were in, they were just sitting on more cash. Forget before the government interventions, but I think that they realized that, living month to month is just not enough. We've got to have 3 to 6 months of cash reserves.
Mm-hmm.
I call it a core capital target that you got to have minimum, because we never know when something like this may come back up, and we can't rely on the government to be able to interject and give us PPP loans and all these other things. And so that was an example of one of the lessons, just one of the many lessons that we've learned. I think diversification of acquisition channels is a big one too. Mm-hmm. I think that there were some businesses that we've worked with that relied on only one channel or one platform to be able to grow their business. Mm-hmm. And it's just not sustainable, right? It just opens you up to a tremendous amount of risk, which goes back to, well, how do you beat the odds? You just can't be reliant upon one vendor, one supplier, even in some cases, one employee, one team member,
right?
Because you leave yourself up to too much risk in your business.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and dig into the principles that you use with your clients, and mm-hmm. listeners and viewers today are going to be very fortunate to hear these things without having to engage your full services. So 6 principles that you use with your clients. I mean, let's maybe name them all and we can dig down deeper into 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. So my 6 principles are: lead yourself first, clarity, alignment, team, execution, and cash. Lead mm-hmm. yourself first. Obviously, you've got to put your oxygen mask on first, right? We were talking about getting on a plane. Well, what do they say in the safety briefings? You've got to put your oxygen mask on first. Clarity. You got to have a vision for where you want to take the company. You've got to get clear yourself. If you're not clear, your team is not going to be clear. I just got off of a coaching session about 30 minutes before we jumped on, and I was just sharing this with one of my private clients and said, it's your responsibility to be clear on the priorities. And we were specifically in the context of that conversation discussing her priorities between now and the end of the year, end of 2022, the next 6.5 weeks or so. And I said, if you're not clear on what's priority, then your team sure as hell is not going to be clear on what's right. priority. So I think that's principle number 2. You got to have clarity. Number 3, we've got to begin to gain alignment to be able to actually execute on those priorities. And that gets into things like, how do we keep score? Mm-hmm. All right. How do we keep score? How do we know the winners from the losers? Number 2, what's our communication rhythms look like? Next, and I know this is a big one for you, team. Tell me who's on your team. Do you have a team of A players? And we like to talk about, how do you attract, how do you develop, mm-hmm. and how do you retain A players? Number 5 is execution. Execution really gets into 2 main things: what's your sales and your marketing strategies, okay, to actually execute on the vision that you have. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, how do we manage the cash in the business? I have a degree from Auburn University in finance. You can actually see the diploma behind me. And I can tell you, my dad was a small business owner. I didn't know jack crap about what it meant to actually run and manage the cash in the business. I'm sad to say, I was running my first 3 years of my first company. I was running that on Quicken, not QuickBooks, Quicken, thinking I was doing it right because I was running it like a checkbook, and I had no idea what I was doing. I've got some pretty embarrassing stories around that. But I realized I need to figure this out. And so I didn't understand income statements, balance sheets, cash flow statements, and I sure as hell didn't know why I needed to know those things. And so again, those are the 6 principles. We can take that wherever you want to go. Lead yourself first, clarity, alignment, team execution, and cash.
Mm-hmm. What do you find yourself focusing on the most with your clients right now? Is there a certain aspect of that gets people stuck the most?
I think it has to, I think that there's a little bit of an order to it. Okay. So lead yourself first is the first principle, but I would tell you that if I went in and I do this and I'm speaking with a business owner, one of the very first questions I'm going to ask him or her is, tell me your priorities. Tell me your priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very surprising to me how few of them are able to give me a specific answer to that. And it ends up becoming a lot of generalities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, truly. They and if it's not specific, it's just too many. I mean, they end up naming everything in the business that they want to do, which as you well know in your work,
Right.
if everything's your priority, nothing is your priority. So I would tell you that very clearly, I think the number one thing that I have seen universal, okay, across the board is helping people to be able to get really clear about where they are today. I call that point A,
Mm-hmm.
and where they want to be in the future.
Sure.
I think if most people listening to this could actually be able to say, well, how would I answer that question? What
Mm-hmm.
would I actually say is where I am today and where I want to be? And I'll just kind of close on this, is that if you and I were both wanting to get to New York City, it's pretty important to know whether or not we're starting in Huntsville, Alabama, or Brooklyn, right? I mean, because different timelines and resources are necessary depending on where you're starting from.
Sure. That's a great segue into another set of tools that I know we discussed that you use, and open-ended, powerful, thought-provoking questions to me is one of the best tools that we can use as human beings to figure out life. And as leaders, I mean, it's really the essence of being a coach is being to prompt people to think deeply by these questions. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, what are the questions that you provoke thinking with for your customers?
Yeah, I agree with you on questions. I really do. I think that when you're coaching and helping people, that it's not so much the power of your answers and your knowledge, but asking really great questions. And so I just gave you the first one, actually, which is,
I had a feeling.
Yeah. Tell me your priorities. Tell me your priorities. Can you accurately describe where you are today and where you want to be in the future? And I'll just tell people that there's 2 really main periods of time: is where do I want to be in 12 months and where do I want to be in 3 years? I think personally, just a segue, I think when you think about your personal life, thinking in maybe a decade long, I think is really good. I don't personally believe in that for the business. I think 3-year periods, my goodness, we're recording this. We're only a couple months away from the 3-year anniversary, really, of the start of COVID. You brought that up earlier. And so think how fast that's gone. And so I think that 3 years seems to be the right amount of time that I have found for people to be able to say, all right, well, let me get really clear on where I want to be 3 years from now. So I would just encourage people to think about, what are my priorities for the next 12 months and for the next 36 months?
Right. I mean, sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but it's so true. It used to be that you could set a 10-year vision in an organization because things were pretty static.
Yep.
Now things are changing so rapidly that, it's almost impossible to project that far out. I mean, you can have, some aspirational goal, but, a true actionable vision. I think I agree with you. 3 years is probably the right number to look at, because just, not just the unexpected things like a pandemic, but, technology, it shifts so much within the course of 3 years. And how could you leverage technology as part of your vision in a way you didn't think of a year ago.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Tony Robbins has said, people overestimate what they can get done in a year and underestimate what they can get done in 2 or 3 decades. And
That's
I
right.
totally agree with that. There's just so many things because when I think about 3 years, it does get down into, I talked about this before, some hard skill stuff, like actually what's my revenue target for 3 years from now? What's my profit target for 3 years from now? You can begin to kind of put together, well, this is what I think it's going to be, 3 years. I think when you start thinking 10 years, it's like, oh man, I don't know. I'm 51. I'll be 51 then. I don't know. I don't know what that's going to be. And I don't know if it's really a great exercise for business owners and leaders to be able to do for 10 years. So anyway, my opinion on that.
Okay. So question number 2.
Show me your calendar. Show me your calendar, which gets really back to the heart of the principle, which is lead yourself first. So interestingly enough, and I have to do this exercise myself quarterly, is I'll say, okay, well, this is the priorities. These are my priorities. Well, where do they show up in your calendar?
Right.
And so often business owners look at that and they say, oh man, this is what I'm saying my priority is, but you haven't allocated any of your personal calendar time to actually making those priorities happen. We're in all the time. And so when I talk about like, well, what does that mean? What would calendar time actually look like for me? It's when are you spending time thinking about the business, planning, creating, assessing, reflecting, all of those things. And so it's like, what was the last 3 months? I will quite literally ask a business owner, what calendar do you use? And they'll say Google Calendar, Outlook, whatever.
Right.
And I'll say, pull it up and we'll go back last 3 months. It doesn't show up anywhere on their calendar. And I think that in and of itself is a big light bulb moment, because then they say, if I'm saying this is my priorities, then I need to make sure I'm allocating some amount of time to making sure that those are in my personal calendar so that I can make sure that we're executing on the priorities that I set forth.
Yeah, I agree with you. What people say and what people do can often be vastly different things in terms of how they spend their time. And I'll have clients do an audit of their time. We can do it looking back, but I'll also have them then do it prospectively. I was like, you don't have to track your time in 6-minute increments like a lawyer, but sort of at least 30 minutes or an hour, like just make a note of how you're spending your time. And then we can look back over the course of 2 weeks and say, all right, you spent 56% of your time in meetings.
Absolutely.
And 20% of your time on email. And, and you're right. When were you actually thinking about the business? So
I totally agree. I totally agree. And I'll just add, give to your audience just one little thing there. Margin is a leadership discipline.
I like that.
Margin is a leadership discipline. How much margin do you have in your schedule? And so I think that's so awesome that you do that, to get people to do an audit, which is why it's so important to be able to have someone that's your coach and mentor, because let's be real, nobody's going to do that on their own unless somebody is actually holding their feet to the fire and saying, let's do this. I mean, it sounds good to say that you're going to do it. You're not going to do it unless you're having someone that's going to help you. So it's awesome that you walk people through that. I learned this, my very first executive coach, and I won't obviously say who it was because they obviously were trying to help me. This is like 2013 or so. I was really struggling in the business. I was overworked, burnout, pretty classic symptoms of a first-time entrepreneur, burning the midnight oil. And so I hired a coach. And I did pick up a lot from that. One of the things I totally disagree with was the fact that we had a calendar. It was on an Excel spreadsheet, and we started to go through and to allocate my time. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. But what they said was no white space. No white space. So if you have white space, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. I bought into that philosophy that I should have no white space. I'm telling you now, if you really want to go faster and go bigger, you need more white space.
Yep.
You do. You need more white space, more flex time, not to waste time. I think for some people, the phone, Twitter, social media can be a distraction. But I think for business owners, it's more meetings and in the business stuff. It's not what everybody else is being distracted with. They're just in the business too much. And you need time that is, you go to a coffee shop for the next 2 hours and think about it and reflect on the last month and what you want to have happen this month. And then maybe you need a whole day to be out of the office, where you go to a lake or a retreat or rent an Airbnb and go to the mountains or go to the beach to be able to actually think about your business.
I sent a client on his own personal retreat to the mountains for a 3-day weekend, 5 years ago, and he came back like as though he had seen the light and just with all sorts of clarity to your principle. So we're simpatico here. All right, so what's the third question?
All right, so what are your priorities? So we're going to get clear on where we are today, where we want to be. Number 2, show me your calendar. Well, number 3 is, okay, now that I've got your calendar, show me your scoreboard. Show me your scoreboard. How are you going to keep score? I love sports. If you're watching this, you can see my Auburn Tigers.
University of Miami Hurricanes, baby.
Yeah, okay. All right.
We are so bad this year. It's humiliating, but
hey, you got a good coach though. You got a good coach. Canes. Yeah, the Canes will come back. I love college football. I love college basketball. Sports has been a big part of my life. There's some amazing parallels between sports and business. There's also some that I do not believe are actually good and healthy, but we won't go into that right now. But one of them for sure is the analogy of show me your scoreboard. If you are saying this is the priorities in the business, how are you going to keep track of it? It seems so obvious, yet oftentimes it's not done, right? People hear the idea, but ideas are useless unless you implement the idea and say, this is how we're going to keep score. We have to be able to tell the winners from the losers. We have to be able to measure our progress of how well we are doing. And so I like to use scoreboards for the business and then scorecards for your team. I'm a golfer, and so I love to play golf. And so I think about scorecards as if you're playing golf. So for your team, but for the business, we need some scoreboards. I'll give you this analogy. We've talked about planes, and so this kind of falls a little bit in line with that. Is we call it going from VFR to IFR. So if you are going to get your pilot's license, they will say you are VFR rated, which means visual flight rules. Okay. So if it's a crystal clear day and you're going to fly a plane that's not going to go very high, it's not going to go very fast, it's a perfectly functioning plane, you are allowed to go fly because you can see the river, you can see the landing strip, you can see the city, you can navigate through what you see, literally outside the window, okay? Well, a lot of business owners run their businesses that way. They're just like, what do I feel and what do I see? And I believe you've got to be able to make the transition to be an IFR rated in your business, which is instrument flight rules.
Okay.
You got to be able to measure. That's great that you're sharing with me how you feel about the business, but what are the numbers telling you? What is the data showing? Okay. What is the revenue? Like, and I'll leave you with this one too. If you are looking at the altimeter to see how much gas you have in the tank, you're going to crash and burn. Right.
Right. Wrong metric.
Exactly. Wrong metric. Like you are not looking at the right thing. So therefore it's scoreboards and then associated dashboards to make sense. Okay. I'm going to go to the Auburn game tomorrow. There's going to be a score there's going to tell us how much time's left. And they're going to say, here's Auburn, here's Texas A&M. There's the score. Well, I can look up on my phone and see how many yards does this running back have, wide receiver, passing stats, turnovers, all of those things, right? That would be the equivalent of additional dashboards in your business to say, I need the main score, which is we're saying these are our priorities. So here's the score. And then we are going to have some additional dashboards that's going to tell us a bigger picture. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And the strategy, the vision is, because we've got these great running players, we're going to do more of a running game than a passing game. Or we've got a great quarterback, so we're going to focus on a passing game. All those things. So I could talk football analogies all day long, and I'm guessing not everybody listening is on the same page with us. So let's move to question 4.
Question 4: Who's on your team?
Okay.
Who's on your team? Tell me who's on your team. I mean, look, any business, Twitter, our businesses, everybody that's listening to this, their business, the business does not exist by itself. The business is a collection of people, obviously moving, and their widgets or their services and, whatever forward. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to have A players. Okay. And so how do you attract amazing people to you? How do you develop those people? Okay. So that would be, how do you let's say with the football, how do you attract 5-star talent? And then once they're in your program, how do you develop them? Right. Sure. You've got to be able to develop them into your culture, into how you do things, because people are different backgrounds, different beliefs, different experiences in their life. And so how are they going to contribute to your culture? And then ultimately, how do you retain them? How do you retain A players? Because we have this thing that we call smashing Rolexes. Okay. And so,
no, don't smash Rolexes unless they're fake ones from Chinatown.
Well, let me actually share with you. And when I've shared this with people, they've had that exact reaction. But you would be shocked how many business owners, leaders are smashing Rolexes throughout the year. Okay. If you have a $50,000 employee, okay, that you're paying, by the time you onboard them, by the time that you go through the recruiting process, and they're with you for 90 days, by the time you pay taxes and all the associated cost, you are in with that person at least $15,000. And then all of a sudden you say, oh, it's not working out. We made the wrong hire. You have turnover. They leave. You fire them, whatever happens. 90 days on a $50,000 employee. You might as well have gone down to the jewelry shop, bought a Rolex, and smashed it.
Yep.
And so therefore it's like, how many Rolexes have you smashed? And so it's interesting in our community, somebody will say, well, you know what? I made a poor decision, but I didn't smash a Rolex. I smashed a Timex. And they're like, I fixed it. But it's designed to get people to think about the cost of turnover in the business.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
That's it. So we laugh about it, which is good. But it really is true whenever you start thinking, oh my gosh, well, what if it's $100,000 employee? I mean, you're going to smash a presidential Rolex just in 90 days, right? But if you get the right person, oh my gosh, if you get the right people, then
right. And you're collecting Rolexes. Yeah.
You're collecting Rolexes.
Even better. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. And the 5th and final question.
All right. 5th and final question. So what are your marketing and sales strategies, and how do you manage the cash in the business? All right. So that's really like 2 questions in one. But what's your marketing and sales strategies, and how do you manage the cash in the business? And I talked a little bit about managing cash in the business earlier. Yeah. I purposely put marketing before sales. I know that people will say sales and marketing department, but I think marketing has to come before sales. I mean, it's marketing's job to deliver to the sales acquisition team.
That's right.
The leads, right, to prospect and do the branding and all those things, to deliver to the sales team the leads. And so I make a distinction to be sure I tell my clients, like, it needs to be, what are your marketing and your sales strategies? And then the biggest thing with that is, too often I find leaders, entrepreneurs, business owners are just trying to run too many plays. They're just trying to run too many plays. And they can't keep score because we're running about 15 different strategies. And I said, well, Bradley, didn't you just say you want diversification? Yes, you do. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that you can actually say, here are our 12 strategies, and then know which one's working and which one isn't.
Absolutely. They've got to prioritize, for sure.
You got to prioritize your marketing sales strategies. Yeah. So those are the 5 key questions.
I love those. And of course, I will attribute smashing Rolexes to you, but I'm going to use that a lot.
That's awesome. Good. I think it's
love
great.
analogies, and I specifically love unique and colorful analogies that really get people to think. It's like, oh crap, I don't want to smash a Rolex. Definitely, and if you don't have a Rolex, women, you don't want to throw out your Christian Louboutins or your Chanel bags.
No, yeah, don't be smashing the red bottoms now. No, don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. So I wanted to just ask you a quick question about your podcast, the Club Capital Leadership Podcast. What kind of guests you have on there, and what's your theme for that show?
It really is all about leadership, right? And so we have, God, I've been so lucky to have some amazing guests to be able to come on the Leadership Podcast. This December will be 3 years since we launched the podcast. And so, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been such a joy to get to meet amazing people like you. And so I'm so grateful for the opportunity. So on Mondays, we just went to 3 days a week, and so Monday episodes are all interview based. Podcast that we drop every Monday. Wednesdays, we just started a new series on Wednesday episodes. And so that's helping. That's primarily going to be for insurance agency owners. It's on the Wednesday episodes that we drop. We're getting into some kind of specific content for those niche business owners. And then Fridays, I do what's called the Bottom Line series. And those are solo episodes. I do an 8 to 12 minute little thing on smashing. I probably should do one on smashing Rolexes. Actually, I haven't done one on that one yet.
Wow, you're more disciplined than I am by a long shot on your podcast.
Well, let me tell you.
It must be a priority for you.
It is a priority. It is a priority. That's actually really, absolutely. It is a priority, but no joke. The easiest part is just Bradley talking. Okay. It is everything else around making that happen. And I'll share that. If it wasn't for the team, there's absolutely no way that those episodes would get out. I mean, no way. And so there is a incredible team that's behind me that pulls all that together to make that happen. I mean, Ali, our podcast engineer, Courtney, my EA and podcast assistant, Ellie, our marketing. I mean, the entire team to pull all that together. Sure. You well know this. It is a major operational load to pull 3 days a week podcast, and to do it consistently, because, listen, when you set out to do something like that, it is about the discipline of showing up on a regular basis and putting that content out. And so you think about scheduling of interviews, et cetera. There's a lot with that. And so, I'm so thankful for the team that I have to be able to make that happen.
Terrific. Well, 2 more questions for you. One, any last words of wisdom before we close out?
I think the hardest thing for business owners and leaders to do is to raise their hand and ask for help.
Yep. And that's a sign of strength to ask for help, not a sign of weakness. And that's a mindset shift that people need to make, right?
It's a mindset shift. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. And when you can get to the point to be able to say, you know what, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, right? Surround yourself is kind of the second point, which is one, having willingness to raise your hand and just say, you know what, I'm stuck here. I don't know what to do. Will you help me? Okay. And then the second part of that is put yourself in a community of other like-minded people who want the same thing. So we talk about community a lot of times in our personal lives, your family, your quite literally your community where you live, maybe where your family, your kids go to school, that being a community. Maybe you have a church community that you're a part of, or whatever that is, a religious community, civic community, whatever. But man, it is so doggone important to have a community for your inside business, right? People who want the same thing, so that you have people that are able to get you. And for the longest time, I was on an island myself, and I thought nobody understands. Well, come to find out, actually, there was a bunch of people that understood, and they said, hey, I get it,
Yeah. Great. And last question is, how can people reach you, find out more about you? If small business owners like, oh my gosh, I love Bradley and I don't want to smash any more Rolexes, how do I reach him?
Yeah, go to the rainmakersdilemma.com. Go to the rainmakersdilemma.com. We have an assessment that will give you a score so that if you want to say, well, how do I score on some of those? We've got an assessment. It's about 40 questions. We talked about the power of questions. So
Yep.
a lot of the people who have taken the assessment say, gosh, actually having to answer the question was really valuable for me to figure out, like, gosh, what is the answer to this? And you'll get a score, and it will score you across all of our different principles that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And it will even give you some ideas and some reminders on some of the things that we talked about today of how you can improve.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking so authentically and really about what's happening out there in the land of small business and entrepreneurs. I know, even people who work in bigger companies, this is just a microcosm of their world too.
Absolutely.
And it relates to, their teams and their smaller sphere of influence. So, I want to say that even if you're not a small business owner, listeners, this stuff is gold. And just a couple, I want to reiterate those 5 questions before we go by way of summary in case anyone joined late and missed them. So the way to beat the odds, folks, is to really ask yourself some tough questions. And if you don't feel compelled to be honest with yourself, get yourself a coach who's going to hold you accountable to really answering these questions. What are your priorities now and 3 years from now? Where do you want to be? Are you aligning your priorities with your calendar? So check that out. How are you keeping track, scoreboards, scorecards, etc.? Do you have players on your team? And what's your marketing and sales strategy? And then further down the income statement and balance sheet, what's your cash position? Because as we saw during the pandemic, you might need that dry powder.
Amen. Amen. I will leave you with one last thing too. Ideas are everywhere, but implementation is everything.
Yep.
Okay. It doesn't matter what you learn, and hopefully this served you. I really do hope that this served somebody and got somebody to think about their teams, their business a little bit differently and challenge you on some things. But again, nothing changes until something changes. And so I hope this served you, but you have to implement something to actually see a change, right? It's just like one thing to absorb, read a book, listen to a podcast, watch a live stream. But if you don't change anything, you don't actually go about implementing it, then it's not going to do you any good.
That's right. Love that. Knowledge is everywhere, but execution is everything. Did I have that right?
Ideas are everywhere.
Ideas are everywhere.
But knowledge, it's the same thing. Ideas are everywhere. Implementation is everything.
Yep. Okay. Love that. Great way to close out. Leadershifters, thank you for joining us today. And here's to holding on to our precious watches and other valuable items, both personally and in our businesses. Until next time.